Banff National Park was the first national park established in Canada. This makes it an IUCN Category 2, focused on ecosystem conservation and protection. Known for its natural hot springs and brightly colored lakes, Banff has continuously increased in popularity throughout the years, making it one of the most highly visited national parks in the world.
Prior to Banff becoming a national park, it was home to multiple tribes of the First Nations people who used the land as a resource for livelihood and spirituality. The town of Banff was a trading post for the tribes for thousands of years, while the river that the town is located on, the Bow River, was used as hunting and fishing ground. The river was seen as a life source for many of the tribes and was of great importance to early settlements.
Treaties with the First Nations started in the early 1700s with the intention of the British and First Nations coexisting without conflict. However, those beliefs were disregarded in 1867 with the creation of the 11 treaties that aimed to relocate indigenous populations and make room for new settlers. Banff is located within Treaty 7 of this proclamation and was signed in 1877 at Beaufoot Crossing. 5 of the Alberta First Nations people signed the treaty: the Blood, Blackfoot, Piegan, Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda nations of Chinika. The treaty promised education, tools, and financial compensation for land. However, like so many other treaties signed by Northern First Nations people, they were not honored to their full extent. After Treaty 7 was signed, all Indigenous people were evicted from the land and have not been allowed back since.
Treaty 7 is still in effect because it involved the Canadian Crown, and those First Nations people still have not had their land returned. They are only allowed to celebrate their culture on Canada's Indigenous Peoples Day on June 21st every year. The next point of Canadian contact with Banff was made with the building of the Canadian Pacific Railway, which led to the development of both towns in the park. Railroad workers then explored the surrounding area, finding hot springs and other unique natural features that led to the establishment of a national park.
Although the railroad industry was booming, automobiles were gaining popularity and the Canadian government wanted a road that brought more tourism to Canada. The Trans-Canada Highway, which runs from the west coast to the east coast, was aimed at decreasing the difficulty of traveling throughout Canada. The highway was completed in 1962 and remains the longest national highway to this day.
Since there is a section of the Trans-Canada Highway that runs through the park for 82 kilometers, or about 50 miles, it also poses a direct threat to wildlife within Banff. With the introduction of a major highway in a natural area, vehicle-wildlife collisions increased. This was addressed in 1996 when they began building wildlife passages. There are now 38 underpasses and 6 overpasses that allow animals to cross the highway without the risk of being hit by passing vehicles.
A more recent threat that affects Banff directly is an increase in wildfires throughout the park.
As climate change continues to impact ecosystems across the world, changes occur on the composition of landscapes. For example, differences in the distribution of species and the shift to a more open forest, which could lead to longer-lasting wildfires. The 2022 management plan talks about the importance of maintaining the integrity of the forest ecosystems within the park.
The focal threat that we identified in Banff is the issue of overvisitation. As one of the most popular national parks in the world, they see more than 4 million visitors per year. The high visitor rate can lead to a couple different problems. First, there's the aspect of managing people in the natural areas. Since there has been an increase in visitors, there has also been an increase in negative human-wildlife interactions and environmental destruction from behaviors like walking off trails and littering. But another important aspect is the amount of pressure being put on the infrastructure and how that affects visitor experience. More people means more congestion on the roads, not enough parking, longer lines, and bigger crowds in general that take away from the natural beauty of the place. One of the most prominent issues in the park is determining how to better regulate human interactions with nature in order to protect the park and wildlife within, while also improving visitor experience. An indirect threat relating to this issue is the Trans-Canada Highway. The highway created the original visitor boom in the 1950s by increasing accessibility, but this has turned out to have negative impacts as well. On top of the 4 million visitors to Banff each year, there is an additional 4 million people that aren't stopping to visit the park, just trying to pass through to their destination. This heightens the environmental effects of the highway and causes added congestion and traffic within the park, which diminishes visitor experience. Economic growth is seen as an underlying cause of overvisitation because the local economy is 90% based on tourism. Banff has tourism income year-round from visitors all around the world due to their seasonal activities, which include skiing, hiking, and shopping. The 2021 Banff and Lake Louise business plan includes encouraging people to spend money in the destination as one of their primary goals. This is the direct reflection of COVID, because after a drop in visitors, Banff wants to work towards restoring tourism and achieving financial security. Economic growth is necessary for the park, however, it is an underlying cause of overvisitation and could be detrimental if overemphasized. With our focal threat being overvisitation, the management zones are important to protect biodiversity and ecological systems. There are 5 zones within the park, as well as designated environmentally sensitive areas, where additional protection measures are put into place to protect significant and sensitive features. Most of the park is in Zone 2, which is the wilderness area, and 10% of the park is in Zone 1, special preservation. Zones 3, 4, and 5, classified as natural environment, outdoor recreation, and park services, make up just over 3% of the park. Since this is where the majority of visitors spend their time, improved management and planning is needed in these areas to mitigate the effects of the 4 million annual visitors to the park.
According to Banff's 2022 management plan, another planning tool being implemented is a human wildlife safety management plan, which considers current visitor use patterns and monitoring data. To reduce risk of conflicts, the plan consists of criteria for intervention, scope of possible actions, and internal protocols. Paired with public communication and education, they hope to reduce human-wildlife conflicts by 2024.
Surprisingly, there are no sustainable use limits in place to monitor and control the amount of visitors. According to Joe Pavelka, an ecotourism and outdoor leadership professor, it would be politically difficult to tell people they can't come visit because Banff is Canada's darling park. A key management principle we identified was dealing with threats that require long-term activity. In the newly released management plan of Banff, they revealed an expert advisory panel that will work on adaptive solutions to moving people sustainably within the park.
Overvisitation is impacting Banff on many levels, including the rise of human-wildlife conflicts. A key management principle that addresses this issue is effective community education may help to reduce threats to protected areas. Although knowledge doesn't always influence behavior, it is important to educate the visitors on how to interact with wildlife and avoid potential conflicts. The last key management principle we identified was the fact that a systematic assessment of human-caused threats may aid effective management. Since overvisitation is one of the biggest threats to the park, it is important that the various impacts of tourism are analyzed, whether that be pollution or destruction of trails. Assessing human-caused threats would be beneficial to the park and allow management to create a plan that effectively addresses those issues.
As mentioned earlier, Banff makes a point to address the human-wildlife conflict increased by overvisitation. However, they fail to incorporate sustainable use limits within their management plan that could help regulate pollution and unnatural damage done to the park. They have risk and incident management systems in place in order to be prepared for threats to the park, such as wildfires.
Banff is home to diverse wildlife and is able to accommodate millions of visitors every year. Although the park has many threats, its management plan is able to account for most of them except for overvisitation, which is currently affecting the park ecosystem services and visitor experiences. Banff has a bright future for their park if they are able to accommodate future visitation.